easy food swaps that instantly boost emotional resilience, the overlooked factor that can make a real difference to how you think, how you feel, and how you function every day. That's what we're gonna talk about today. So, does this sound familiar to you? You know yourself pretty well. You've done some work on yourself, but your energy just doesn't feel right. It's not where it should be. So you're probably doing some moderate exercise as well, and yet your energy just isn't right. You probably tire more easily than you expect. And there are emotional cycles still going on. You understand them. Your thinking sometimes feels slower or foggier than you know it can be. And you're simply not living or working at the level that you want or that you know you're capable of. So that's not unlike the place where I found myself last year, and where most people working on emotional resilience focus on techniques like mindset, habits, psychology, therapy, CBT, business coaching. Almost nobody looks at food, but consider that the brain runs on what we feed it. Now, that wasn't exactly me. I had always had an interest in food, and I had a pretty healthy, what's considered a pretty healthy diet. So the diet included a lot of fruit and veg. It included nuts and seeds. It included supplements like vitamin C and all sorts. Right, so I thought that I was nourishing my body and my brain pretty well. Because what you eat every day will either quietly support your emotional resilience or quietly work against it. But yet, a year ago, I would have told you a very different story as to what's beneficial for your resilience and what isn't. I thought I was eating well, and then I made some changes to my diet. So I came across something I hadn't heard of before. I bought the book. I will share with you what that is. And when I read the book, I became really curious to try this stuff out. And I started making changes as I do. I excluded certain foods, and this is the result that I got. So I think within about 2 weeks, I had a neuralgic pain in my back, and I had that ever since we all got COVID as a family a few years ago. Ever since then, on and off, I still had this funny neuralgic pain along my spine. When I changed my food and supplement intake, it disappeared entirely within about 2 weeks. My sleep improved. And then over the next 2 months or so, my thinking became sharper. Now, I didn't think that I didn't have sharp thinking, but once it changed and once it became sharper, I could see that I hadn't been functioning at optimum. And with all that, my energy improved greatly. I was able to get up real early and do a lot of stuff. And so I've been feeling really, really good ever since. And so that's why I want to share my story with you, what you can achieve with some simple dietary changes. So very early in life, our brains are immature and wide open for programming. Experiences that aren't ideal for healthy emotional development, that are difficult or even outright traumatic during this time, will be tagged by the amygdala as chronic stress. And this is where I share with you what I specialize in, which is helping you clear faulty childhood programming, which is notorious for running emotional cycles. So think of this week I'm running a emotional roller coaster workshop, and these are some of the emotional cycles we're working on: fear of visibility, self-doubt, anxious overthinking, fear of charging your worth, fear of public speaking, people pleasing. Some of these I also had, but that's in the distant past. And maybe you also feel unworthy, and that would be part of it. If you want to improve your income, faulty childhood programming is a great place to work. Maybe you don't like yourself very much. Maybe you have chaos, crisis, negative cycles in your relationships. Maybe you're going from one course or coaching program to another. Maybe you keep struggling with the same issues. And that's what my workshops are for. As I said, one of them is running currently. That's the emotional roller coaster workshop, where I help you understand the issues from a science perspective so you can regain control. I show you ways of working that make a felt difference and that help you regulate your emotions quickly and effectively. I will pop the registration link for my event, for my workshop waitlist in the comments. And so, despite all this emotional work, there's another slide here about my work, because faulty childhood programming shapes the adult nervous system, your identity, your decision making, and creates emotional patterns that in the distant past may have helped us cope, but now limit us. But when you've done the deep work and when your emotional baseline is much improved, that's when you start to notice things that you couldn't hear before. And basically from that place, I discovered there was more to the food layer than I had previously understood. When I started to really listen to my body and read the signs, knowing when I was feeling more resilient and when I wasn't. And that's when I had the openness as well to look deeper into food. Now, this is something I was already doing, but I'll start here because this is a really sensible starting place for anyone. And consider the findings of this study. It was in the media last year, I think about last summer. I found this study probably on BBC or one of the main news channels where it was being publicized. The consequences of eating ultra-processed foods. So ultra-processed foods are foods that are really far removed from anything you find in nature. So think of things like crisps. Think of what you buy in the supermarket that has a lot of additives in it. So, for example, yogurts with emulsifiers and added sugar and a lot of E numbers in them. Anything with E numbers in it will count as an ultra-processed food. So it's worth your while always reading the label and identifying what's ultra-processed. And this is what they found. Overall, from mental disorders, if you add 10% more ultra-processed foods in your diet, you had a 25+% increase in any mental disorders. So anything at all of psychological, psychiatric disorders, a 25% increase. Oops. Really worth your while looking at that and improving your diet. For anxiety disorders, it was a 28% risk increase when you had 10% more ultra-processed foods in your diet. For depressive disorders, a 33% increase in the risk. That's huge, people. And it tells you, and the study is quoted here, or rather cited underneath on the slide, if you're interested in looking into it more deeply. it is an absolute, it should be an absolute warning sign to really go through your shopping list and just exclude some of these things that count as ultra processed. It's so easy to buy them. They are so easily accessible. Read the label. So, and that's, it's a little bit of work, maybe a couple of weeks work of getting into the swing of excluding at least the worst offenders and just not have them in your cupboard or in your fridge. Here are some examples for the types of foods that drain you, that are ultra processed: fast food, processed snacks, sweets, sugary drinks, energy drinks, refined white bread, pasta, pastries, deep fried foods, alcohol. Alcohol is never a good idea, whether it's ultra processed or not. Foods with artificial additives, colorings, preservatives. That's the E numbers in that bracket. But there are many alcoholic drinks too that include E numbers. Think of the, what were they called? Alco Pops, I think. A few years ago, they were really popular and all the young people were having Alco Pops. Stuff like that would contain E numbers when it has funny colors that shouldn't be there. There are, of course, more natural kind of forms of drink like wine, maybe that's been, where there aren't any E additives to the wine, or maybe beers that went through a natural process. And of course, the odd one will do no damage. More foods that drain you, and some of these might surprise you. So, for example, meats like ham they also count as ultra processed. Canned foods count as definitely processed if they contain E numbers, ultra processed. Excessive caffeine, not a good idea. So like I have my 1 cup in the morning, maybe another one after that that'll already be diluted. But watch your caffeine intake. Definitely in the afternoons, because you might not be able to settle in the evenings. There are certain fats that are not beneficial, really worth looking out for those. So any vegetable oils that you use for frying, especially if it's hydrogenated vegetable oil, cut it out. Sunflower oil isn't so bad, but anything that has processed ingredients like many margarines do, like many vegetable oils do, that contain trans fats or will turn into trans fats as you're frying them, they would actually be dangerous for you. And much preferable for frying then would be things like coconut oil, butter, and sunflower oil isn't so bad. And high oxalate foods, and this is the discovery that I made, and that's what I want to share with you. So high oxalate foods, that was a huge surprise for me. I'd never heard about these before. Basically, what we're looking at here is that on the health food market, basically there is a myth going around that anything that's plant-based, there's a huge push towards veganism going on as well. Think of Vegan January and movements like that want to encourage healthy eating. But often the myth runs through that anything plant-based is good for you. And that simply isn't true. I'm sure that if you really thought about it, you can think of a handful of poisonous, toxic plants that grow even just in your garden. Maybe not directly in your garden, but in gardens or throughout the city on patches of land where stuff just grows. There are weeds that are toxic, right? And there's a reason we don't let our children just roam around in the bushes and eat any old berries or leaves or anything they find. It's because we know there is such a thing as toxic plants. And so apparently, this was widespread knowledge in the mid-19th century, that certain plants like spinach, beetroot, chard, they're all in the same family as well, in the beet family of vegetables, will affect your health and your emotions in certain ways. And even back then, it was noted that they raise levels of depression, levels of kind of impulsive anger, and also come with health symptoms. Now, when you measure the oxalates in them, these few things I've listed here are sky high in oxalates, and I excluded them immediately. Almonds, I had been drinking almond milk daily for my morning, for my breakfast, right? So the almond milk would go over the muesli or whatever it was I would be eating, and it would go in my tea as well. So I swapped that actually for real milk, and the chard, spinach, or beetroot have not been in my kitchen ever since. So this is something you can do very easily, is just exclude the high offenders that are on this list. There are a few more. But if you are feeling excited about this and curious about this, this is the book I recommend, Sally K. Norton, Toxic Superfoods, because there are many, many more, right? These are just on this list here. What I'm showing you is some of the sky high offenders that are very typical in your kitchen, in your diet. There are others that maybe aren't so sky high, like, for example, carrots, sweet potatoes. You wouldn't completely exclude them, but you would limit the portion size somewhat. And so what can happen if we're not paying attention to high oxalate foods in our diet is we can end up with chronic fatigue, with low energy, with brain fog, which is what I subsequently discovered I had actually had when my thinking became much sharper. In hindsight, I thought, oh gosh, I actually had brain fog and I didn't even know it. You can develop anxiety and mood disturbance, joint and muscle pain. And as I said, my neuralgic pain that I had along my spine disappeared within 2 weeks of cutting down on the levels of oxalates. It can cause inflammation in the body. And of course, that inflammation can go anywhere. So it's not particular of any particular organ or body part. This inflammation can cause trouble anywhere. And Sally K. Norton links it to all kinds of conditions, for example, even to cancer, if there's ongoing long-time inflammation in the body. Poor sleep, slow recovery after illness, recurrent injuries, slow healing. All of these things can happen. Really worth listening to an interview with her on YouTube, and consider buying the book Toxic Superfoods. For me, it was an absolute eye-opener. Modern diets are overloaded with oxalates because we've been told to eat more superfoods. Spinach, almonds, sweet potatoes, dark chocolate, also sky high in oxalate. Dark chocolate, haven't touched it since, are all high oxalate and are all routinely promoted as health foods. And that's where we begin to look at the opposite end of the scale. But let me just add, before actually I move on to so I removed all the huge offenders. I removed them immediately, and I saw this initial improvement within 2 weeks. If you want to cut down further on the oxalate load in your system, which I have done over a process of now a year. There are certain steps to that, and you do want to consult Sally's system for that as to how to step down, because once oxalates are in your system, they can cause, if you just sort of come down from all of them at once, it can create havoc in your system. It's basically like a toxic shock as they all become released from the tissues if you don't take in enough to buffer that. And that would be naturally not a good thing. So you want to do it slowly, you want to follow the recipe, you want to do it step by step. So this is the other end of the scale. These are safe vegetables and fruit that you can eat plenty of and no problem at all. Broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower. So that means the cabbage family is pretty safe. Actually, Brussels sprouts is not true. Brussels sprouts are reasonably high in oxalates. So we need to take them out of there. That's my mistake. Green peas, red peppers, relatively safe. Blueberries, bananas, apples, pears, very safe. Oranges, peaches, cherries, watermelon, totally safe. Ripe tomatoes, a certain amount of them eaten raw. Not too many, and not cooked tomatoes, but ripe tomatoes eaten raw. And the picture changes when it's cooked because it's so much more concentrated, and then the concentration of oxalates in the tomato passata or sauce or whatever you're cooking will go up. And what's safe for proteins and fats and other types of foods? So we're looking at eggs, salmon, sardines, mackerel, beef, pork, chicken, organ meats, cheeses, ideally not moldy cheeses. Quark is very good for you. Also sold in the English-speaking world as cottage cheese. Quark is the German word for it, and it's a dairy product which is a byproduct of making butter. You can use it to make cheesecake and all kinds. You can buy quark in Tesco, for example. It's very rich in protein, so it's very, very beneficial. Certain amount of walnuts. Every day they're pretty much the only nut that is safe. Pistachios are safe, pumpkin seeds are safe. So other than that, nuts and seeds actually should be no-go territory because they're all very high in oxalates. As I said, for frying, coconut oil, butter, ghee, very beneficial and great if you can include it in your diet is live yogurt, kimchi, which is fermented cabbage. It's a Korean recipe. You can make it at home in about 3 weeks in a plastic bag. It's delicious. Sauerkraut, which is a German thing that you can also make at home, but you can buy it in the health food shop in jars. It's a cultured product that adds very beneficial bacteria to your guts, same as kombucha will do as well. And then for seasoning and spices, white pepper, pink Himalayan salt, and some spices generally are very high in oxalates, but the thing is we use very little of them on average. So a little bit is fine. And it's not about excluding everything. It's just about minding the portion size so that you're not overloading your system. Yeah, so, and here's the thing. If you leave it until you're hungry and you're pressed for time, what's going to happen is you will reach for whatever is there, whatever you can find when you're out and about, or whatever is there in your press, in your fridge that's ready to use. And that's where you're very likely to walk into the territory of processed foods or foods that are unsuitable on other grounds. So it's a good idea to be prepared. And so for going to work every day into the office where all you might have access to is a microwave, meal prepping is a great thing. You can do that for 2 or 3 days ahead and remove that weakness in your weekly food intake. So here are some tips on meal prepping. A large pot of stew, or fill your slow cooker with stew or with a roast or just with meat. And there are many slow cooker recipes out there. Put it on in the morning, and when you come back from work, then you can divide it up. You can freeze some of it in portions. You know, you have your dinner for that evening already looked after, freeze the rest in portions. And then you defrost it the night before and then heat it at work the following day. Or batch cook meats like chicken thighs or ground beef at the weekend and store them in separate portions. And then on the day, if you want to steam vegetables and have the room to do so, then that's all you have to do. Baby potatoes you can have prepared and eat them cold. Or you just combine the whole lot with a salad. And what's also really handy is hard-boiled eggs. So if you want to boil them ahead of time, they last for a week in the fridge, or you can put some hard-boiled eggs on while you have your shower in the mornings and then bring them to work. And eggs, of course, are really beneficial protein, really good for you. And you can have 2 eggs a day. That's a safe intake if you have cholesterol concerns. And then for carbs, the baby potatoes that you might already have there and that you have prepared. And if you want to heat them up at work, you can. You might cook rice ahead of time and put it in batches and put it in the fridge. Or, in fact, you can get in the supermarkets batches of rice in little pouches. Definitely the Lidl and Aldi do them. I've seen them in pouches, and you can pop them in the microwave with your meal for work. And then another thing that's really easily done is roasted root vegetables. Root vegetables are ideal for roasting, and then these don't become unappetizing if you put them in the fridge, and you can bring those with you. They're also very high in carbs. Some of them high enough in oxalates, so you will mind your portion size. You'll just have a small enough portion of them. The turnip is safe, the parsnip as well, but carrots can be high in, and are high in oxalates, I should say, reasonably high. And so this is the guide I promised you. This guide you can claim by commenting food guide underneath this video. And so here's the thing: food nourishes the brain and the body. It can make a real difference to how you feel day to day. It's really worth making some changes and seeing how far you can push the boat for your emotional resilience. And then if you want to go deeper on the emotional and psychological layer, the faulty childhood programming that sits at the root of what's holding you back, that's exactly what my workshops are designed to do. I mentioned them already. Of course, you get the best results when you work on both levels, when you take good care of your body with exercise, with nourishing your brain and your body, and also when you take care to clear the outdated emotional code informed by the distant past that you no longer want to dictate how you live your life, how you show up for your work. So this is where you can register for my waitlist at this link down here. Registering there will ensure that you will be first to hear about the next workshop that's coming up. So the two types of workshops I have right now are Emotion Reset and the Emotional Roller Coaster Workshop. They do different things, and depending on what's up for you, whether generally your emotions are playing up and it feels like you need to regulate them better, then Emotion Reset would be the place to go. And if you're struggling with emotional cycles, then the Emotional Roller Coaster Workshop would be the first port of call.